I don't necessarily consider myself a YA author. My first book, Fruit, was told through the voice of a 13-year-old protagonist, but it wasn't considered YA at the time. I don't know if it came out today, if it would be considered YA, but back then it was marketed, I guess, as adult fiction. And my last book was adult fiction as well. When I was writing this book, I mean, I've always kind of had a soft spot, I guess, for teen narrators, probably because I'm still working through the issues that I dealt with when I was a teenager, and I see their struggles as my own in a lot of ways. I was trying to write the book through the lens of the father, the female impersonator character, but I spent, like, honestly, like 2-3 years maybe writing that story, and it just never came together. Like, I just didn't have that spark, and that's like the worst feeling when you're a writer, is when you realize that whatever you've been working on 450 pages later does not have that bit of magic that it needs to have, and you have to sort of start over again. So once I kind of decided that Toby, this 15-year-old girl, was the narrator for the story, like, and it was through her perspective, it kind of came a little bit more firmly into shape that I was working with a YA book. And I just felt like once I understood that, I understood the story a lot better, and I understood the potential reader a lot better. And I think that kind of helped to shape, her story and her relationships with the people around her. And so it wasn't intentional. And if I had set off to write it intentionally as YA, it probably wouldn't have been, I don't think it would have been a very good book, because I probably would have been too self-conscious of the audience, like writing to somebody. And I think that's the one thing with many YA writers that I've met and I admire them for, is they just kind of plunge right into that heavy subject matter. Like, they are not holding back in any way. And I probably, as a newbie, would have been more self-conscious about going into that YA market, and being concerned about what I was saying, and trying to insert too much of a false narrative probably into that story. So I didn't realize it was going to be YA until closer to the end. And then once I understood, it all sort of came together. But had I started it off as a YA book, it probably wouldn't have worked for me. I would have been too self-conscious about it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, in my case, I had my first novel was an adult novel, and these are all marketing categories, obviously, like historical. It's a marketing category. But after that, I started writing young adult, and I've kind of been very committed to it since then. And it's been a world that I really love. I mean, both in terms of the authors, the readers, the librarians who are so warm, but also just in terms of the kinds of stories that are being told and the risk taking. And I come, from the world of film and TV, where I've been working for most of my career, much longer than I've been writing books. And one of the reasons I started writing books is my frustration with trying to get movies about Iranian characters made, and queer Iranians. Very, very hard in Hollywood. And so YA has just been this like ray of light to me, because it's like a place where people are actually asking for those stories and shepherding them. But I will say, I don't think, like, I tend to write first and foremost for myself, I suppose, for like a version of my young self. And I kind of allow my editor to guide me on anything that may not be right for the genre, the market. And what I've been like happily surprised by is that young adult, like, there's such a breadth of diversity, not just in the kinds of stories, but in the limits that certain books push, in the literary styles. I mean, there's so much out there, and so many adults read it as well. I mean, for me, it's just a story, it's storytelling. And as Brian said, I'm fascinated by the emotions I felt as a teen. They still come to the surface. And with this book, I felt like I had read quite a few, not enough, but quite a few books or seen movies about the generation that was on the front lines of the AIDS epidemic. I don't think I had ever read a book that told the experience of what it was like to come of age as a teenager, going through all those emotions as AIDS was at its worst. And I thought there was space to tell that story, which is really my story. And so it was exciting to have a genre that was, that exists, that welcomed it.